Hi everyone, welcome to Plugged. Welcome to another episode of Plugged. I'm your host Grace, and I'd like to dive deeply into waiting seasons. And I know I've talked about it. I've talked about waiting seasons before. Like my last episode was about waiting seasons and transitioning seasons, but I think I'd like to just emphasize on the importance of stewarding waiting seasons well. Because if there's a season that is overlooked and ignored, is waiting seasons. And I don't know why. I honestly don't know why we overlook waiting seasons. That, like, I don't know why. It was a waiting season that costed an entire generation of the Israelites their promise. You know the story about the Israelites and how they were on a journey from Egypt to the Promised Land, and they encountered a long waiting season, a season that went longer than it was supposed to be. And in that waiting season, it got to a point where God said that that particular generation would not see their promise, would not enter the Promised Land. And it's because they did not steward the waiting season well. They did not. It costed them. And I'm not saying that not waiting well will cost you your promise. No, I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that it is important to steward waiting seasons well. And that is what we are talking about in this episode. Because we usually think we are just waiting for something to happen. We usually think like it's just a season, it will pass. And yes, it will pass. But while we are waiting for the promise, something else is happening within us. Our souls are being shaped. Shaped into what exactly? Like, what are we talking about? For a long time, I thought the hardest part of waiting was the delay itself. But eventually I realized that waiting wasn't just affecting my circumstances, it was affecting my soul. So I've been in a waiting season for quite some time now, and it started affecting me in a way that I never thought it would affect me. Like, it wasn't a big deal. Honestly, I didn't feel like it was a big deal, but it became a big deal because it was affecting my soul. It was affecting me in a way I never expected. And what is the soul, you may ask? Psychologically, the soul, or the psyche, can be understood as our internal world, the place where our thoughts, our emotions, our memories, our desires, and the sense of our identity resides. It is the part of us that processes suffering, experiences joy, and searches for meaning. And ultimately, the soul can be beautifully summarized as the irreducible essence of who you are. It is basically who you are. It is who you are on the inside, deep down, who you are. And so, in knowing what the soul is, seasons of waiting often arrive carrying a hidden burden that we don't talk about, that we are not aware of. Hope deferred. You hoped that you would be married by 30. You hoped that you'd have children by a certain age. You'd hoped that your business will flourish by a certain timeline. You imagined a different outcome for your life, but the dream remained unfulfilled. And so a deeper question emerges. What happens to the soul when hope is repeatedly postponed? What happened to the soul? What happens to the soul when a waiting season that you thought would take a certain amount of time prolongs, and it seems like the promise is repeatedly being postponed? Proverbs 13:12, I think, tells us that hope deferred makes the heart sick. In other words, prolonged seasons of disappointment creates more than just frustration. It wounds the inner life. It affects how we see ourselves, how we see God, and how we see the future. And over time, deferred hope can breed a quiet resentment, emotional numbness, or even a fear of dreaming again. And it is quiet because you don't see it coming. We rarely see those quiet feelings coming. We rarely see it coming. And so the soul begins to protect itself by lowering its expectations. You had set high goals, you had set these high expectations, but through deferred hope, you begin lowering your standards, you begin lowering your expectations. And if all that is left unattended, we remain psychologically trapped in the waiting room long after circumstances have changed. And the result is often like a life marked by ashes. You've moved on, you've moved from that season to another, but you carry, the residue of disappointment, the residue of grief, the residue of loss, and dreams that never came to pass. So, for example, a person spends years waiting for marriage, and they become so accustomed to self-protection that when love finally arrives, they struggle to receive it. The promise has come, the promise came, but the soul remained in survival mode. Another example is an entrepreneur who maybe spent so many years fighting financial hardship, and they finally begin to prosper, yet they continue operating from a scarcity mindset, unable to enjoy the fruit of their labor because their soul is still expecting lack. An employee who spent years praying for a promotion finally receives the promotion, the position they've been praying for, but they end up feeling inadequate because their identity has now become anchored in striving rather than belonging. In short, the circumstance changes, but the internal world never catches up. You've left the waiting season, you've left the wilderness geographically, but emotionally you are still there. Psychologically, you are still in that moment of, the greatest tragedy is not that we waited too long, but it is that we carry the mindset of the waiting room in the very thing we were waiting for. And this is where reclaiming the soul comes in. To reclaim the soul is a conscious declaration that you refuse to be permanently defined by what broke you, what left you, or what kept you waiting. It is the courageous act of gathering the scattered pieces of your soul and believing that wholeness is still possible. It is the decision to return home to yourself, to who God created you to be, after seasons of waiting, after seasons of disappointment, after seasons of loss, delay, and heartbreak. So this is why we are reclaiming the soul, because life is life, and life usually leaves ashes. And not only ashes of waiting, but ashes of unmet expectations, ashes of dreams that never unfolded the way we imagined, ashes of burnt out hope after years of disappointment. And some ashes come from what happened to us, others come from what never really happened. And to reclaim the soul is to participate in that restoration. And guys, today I'm excited to finally share that my book, I Dared to Wait, Reclaiming the Soul in the Season of Waiting, is now available. This book was born from my own journey through waiting, disappointment, healing, and restoration. I'll share with you guys the links on where you can get the book. The book explores what happens to the soul when hope is deferred, why healing matters, and how God can use seasons of waiting to transform us. Thank you guys for being part of this journey with me. It has been a while. It's been a long journey. And I'd like to just remind you that waiting is not the end of your story. A delayed promise does not have to become a damaged identity. You can wait and still remain whole. Bye.